Hello, and welcome to Law Talk. My name is John Celebrezze, and I'm the co-founder of the Celebrezze-Zangi Community Legal Education Project, as we call it, CZ-CLEP for short. Our organization provides continuing education about the judiciary and legislature to attorneys, judges, government officials, and the general public. As a career educator, I recognize early on how important legal matters are and how they impact our lives. I am the nephew of the late Anthony J. Celebrezze, who was the popular 5-term mayor of Cleveland and a member of President Kennedy's cabinets. As a tribute to his lifetime commitment to the legal process, we dedicate this show.
John's special guest today is Judge James L. Kimbler, retired from the Medina County Common Pleas Court on January 1st, 2015, after serving 18 years as Common Pleas Court Judge. Prior to serving on the Common Pleas Court, Judge Kimbler has served on the Wadsworth Municipal Court for over 10 years. Since his retirement, Judge Kimbler has founded North Coast ADR Services, which specializes in alternative dispute resolution, including mediation, arbitration, and private judging. Now let's join John and his special guest.
Judge, welcome
John.
back.
Well, thank you.
Boy, time goes. I was thinking about it today. I think the first show we did was on foreclosures about 5 years ago. We've had some other interesting topics, but there's a major difference in your life now than last time you were my guest, right?
A couple of them, yeah. I'm retired and my wife took my job.
Wow. Big doings at the Kimblers.
Yeah, I guess.
So you, as of the first of this year, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so you are officially retired.
I am.
But interestingly enough, today's topic is that of a private judge, correct?
Yes.
So apparently you're still interested in being a judge, right?
I'm interested in alternative dispute resolution, which would include what we would call private judging, and also mediation and also arbitration. When I first started looking into retirement about maybe a year and a half ago, right at the end of 2013, at the beginning of 2014, I came across a website about a judge named Judge Cox, who had formed a company called Judicial Alternatives of Ohio.
I see.
And he was doing what he referred to, what I refer to as private judging, which is a mechanism under the Ohio Revised Code by which retired judges can be hired by litigants in a civil lawsuit to do a non-jury trial.
Okay.
So that is one form of alternative dispute resolution, and by alternative dispute resolution we mean ways of resolving civil cases, primarily civil cases, that don't rely on traditional court hearings. The other two ways are probably mediation, which is where a mediator facilitates or helps the parties arrive at a settlement by themselves. And then the third would be arbitration. And the difference between arbitration and private judging is that when an arbitrator sits as a person who is going to resolve the dispute, that is not a court decision. That is, the arbitrator makes a decision pursuant to a contract that's entered into by the parties. That contract can then that contract then allows the arbitrator to reach a decision. That decision can be enforced by a court, but is not the court decision itself.
I see.
As opposed to a private judge, which is
Okay.
somewhat different.
Well, I have several questions about
Sure.
a private judge, which I'd like for you to walk through with me today,
Sure.
and I think my viewers would be very interested. But just to back up for a minute, I mean, this is kind of an interesting time in your life, and we all remember you for 29 years, I believe, black robe, on the bench, generally having some dialogue with a defense attorney like myself, a prosecutor, and a defendant. But it doesn't sound like you're going in that direction at all with this type of private judging. Is that
Right. Private judging is only civil cases. It cannot be a criminal case, and it cannot be a jury trial. It has to be a non-jury trial. And private judging is done pursuant to the revised code. And there's a section on private judging which is section 2701.10. And 2701.10 allows a retired judge, and it has to be a retired judge, who has retired from active service as a judge, to file a notice with the Supreme Court of Ohio that that judge is willing to serve as a private judge. And then what happens is that the parties then contract with that judge to have that judge hear the case. Now, on this, when you first talk about this, when I first explain this to people, they think it's like arbitration, but it's not like arbitration, because when a private judge makes a decision, that private judge decision can be appealed to the Court of Appeals.
I see.
It has the same authority or the same power or the same status as a decision that would be issued by what the code refers to as an active judge. For example, let's suppose you had two parties to a divorce and they wanted to have a private judge hear the divorce, or two parties to a breach of contract lawsuit and they wanted to have the private judge hear the breach of contract lawsuit. They would enter into an agreement among themselves. They would file that agreement with the clerk of courts, and then the judge, the active judge, which is the term the code uses, the active judge would then have to refer that case to the private judge. The private judge would hold the hearing, take the evidence, issue a decision, file that decision with the clerk of courts, and that decision would then become the judgment of the court, and that decision could be appealed to the Court of Appeals.
So the new hat that you are wearing now, I believe you mentioned to do this, you file with the clerk of courts, which
Right.
I understand you have.
Yeah, I filed
here in other counties too.
Right. You can file, there's an unlimited, under 2701.10, you could file, you can file in all 88 counties. What I chose to do was to file in Medina County and the 5 contiguous counties, which are Ashland, Cuyahoga, Lorain, Summit, and Wayne counties, plus Medina County. And the reason why I did that, quite frankly, is because the lawyers inside that 6-county area probably know me better than they would know me outside that 6-county area. And also, quite frankly, it's easy to get to in terms of driving time.
Yeah.
But theoretically, I could do it in any county in the state.
So in a way, you're a little bit like the old circuit judge.
Yeah, it's really funny. Judge Cox, who is a retired judge from Gallia County and now lives in Franklin County, he has this website, Judicial Alternatives of Ohio, and one of his slogans is, "Has gavel, will travel." And I'm not quite sure that I'm going to have a snazzy slogan, but basically that's what he's doing, is he is traveling to other places to hold hearings in cases involving civil lawsuits, domestic relations, any kind of civil case, actually.
This is pretty interesting because, you know, I've known you for a long time, and you always do have some very creative ideas. I guess I'm curious, though, you know, you rolled in the mediation, which I understand from our conversation recently, you've actually been going to Capital Law School.
Yeah, I'm going to Capital Law,
yourself.
right, to be certified as a mediator.
Okay, so you could be a mediator as well as your company is going to look at arbitration?
Right. What I would probably do in the arbitration situation is I would be a one-person arbitrator, and I would hear cases involving probably contractual issues, commercial lawsuits. I think I will register. I have not yet done so as of today, which is April 21st. But I will be registering with the American Arbitration Association, which is a national group that is a clearinghouse for arbitrators who are registered. Arbitrators do not have to be attorneys, but I think in the case of myself, I think the fact that I am a lawyer as well as have almost 29 years of judicial experience would allow me to be a pretty effective arbitrator.
Oh, I would think so. One thing's for sure, Judge, it doesn't look like you're going to have any abundance of spare time on your hands in your retirement years.
Yeah. Well, I control my own docket, and also part of the deal that was made in the Kimbler household is I have to do at least half the cooking.
Oh, okay.
So no matter what I'm doing in terms of my business, I think I'm going to be doing at least half the cooking.
Well, that's
Which,
good.
by the way, I think I'm actually a pretty good cook.
That's good, Judge. I mean, that's maybe I'll sample your cuisine someday. Okay, moving on though. I just find it really interesting that many of your colleagues, I mean, judges retire, oftentimes they sit by assignment.
Right.
You could do that.
I'm going to do that. As a matter of fact, I'm set to be up this Thursday and Friday, which would be, we're filming this April 21st. I'm actually set to be in the 23rd and the 24th, which would be this coming Thursday and Friday. I'm scheduled to sit for Judge Tom Parker over in Summit County, and then I'm also set 2 weeks after that. I'm set, I think, on the 5th and 6th, or the 6th and 7th of May, to sit in over in Summit County again, and that's for Judge Callahan. How that works is that you register with the House Supreme Court that you want to be considered to be a assigned judge, and you have to be a retired judge who was not defeated but was left the bench voluntarily.
I see.
And then the Chief Justice adopted a system where you send the Chief Justice a resume, she reviews it, and then she puts you on a list, and then you are eligible to sit by assignment anywhere in the state. Actually, I could sit probably, because I served on both the municipal court here in Wadsworth and also on the common pleas court, I could probably sit on the common pleas court and the municipal court, and I think I could even sit on a court of appeals. But I would anticipate that when I go to Akron this week, I'll be sitting with the Summit County Common Pleas Court.
Okay. Let's come on back to the private judge, because I think that's pretty unique here. I mean, not to take away from retired judges who sit by assignment, but you're taking on something pretty. I won't say it's new, but it's pretty unique. How does a case get referred, Judge, to a private judge?
Well, what happens is that the parties would, through their attorneys, would contact the private judge, and then what they would do is they would say, are you willing to hear this case? The private judge would make sure that he or she doesn't have any kind of conflict of interest.
Okay.
So what could cause a conflict? Well, for example, if you are being asked to do a case where you know the parties personally, they're personal friends of yours, or you're being asked to do a case where you may have a business interest in a business that's being sued, but assuming you don't have a conflict, the parties then enter into a contract with the private judge and themselves, and they file that contract with the active judge, at the clerk of courts who has the case. The active judge then transfers that case to the private judge, and the private judge then begins to hold whatever hearings are necessary.
Okay. All right, but private judge, public judge, for lack of what you
actually an interesting way to put it.
Well, okay. I mean, a role you played for many, many years. But you mentioned about a conflict of interest. Somebody was owned a business interest. He was my brother-in-law. But the same ethical standards will apply to you.
Absolutely. A private judge is governed by the Code of Judicial Conduct. A private judge is governed by the Ohio Rules of Evidence.
I see.
The Ohio Rules of Civil Procedure. Their journal entries, judgment entries are subject to the Ohio Rules of Appellate Procedure. The only difference is, there's three differences, maybe four depending on how you look at it. Number one, private judge cannot do a criminal case.
Okay.
Number two, a private judge cannot do a jury trial. Number three, a private judge is compensated by the parties. And number four, and this actually goes with the why you can't do a jury trial. The hearings have to take place outside the courthouse, because 2701.10 says that a public judge, which is a good way to look at it, that the public judge does not have to give up either personnel or facilities
I
to the
see.
private judge.
I see.
So, for example, Judge Cox, when he has a trial, will often hold the trial in a hotel conference room, and the parties will then present the evidence. He'll bring in a court reporter or a recording system. They will then have the case, and the judge will then issue the decision.
But
This has actually been around since 1984.
really?
Yeah, but it hasn't actually been used that
I've-
much.
Until you brought this to my attention, and I've been involved with the law myself for many years, I had never heard of it.
I didn't know about it until January of 2014.
About that. But at the end of the day, albeit I'll say you're in another venue using the word that you're not in the courthouse, but your decision, when you sit down and write that decision, has exactly the
Right.
same impact as
Exactly
when
right.
you wore your black robe in courtroom
Right.
number 2.
Right.
And we're going to the Court of Appeals or wherever we're going with it.
Right. Yes. Assuming,
Okay.
either party could appeal.
All right. Right. Okay. So once again, you mentioned agreement. It's almost like there's obviously a contract.
Right.
But I guess maybe to bring it home to my viewers, I think you touched on this, but who pays for the private judge? I mean, it's
Parties
not,
split the fee.
so
They work out an arrangement with the private judge, whatever that arrangement is, and then the private judge, like for example, let's suppose that they were paying $1,000.
Okay.
For the judge's services. Then each side there was two parties. Each side would put up $500.
So using myself as an example, if I had a client and I said, Judge Kimbler is now in the private judging business, so to speak, and of course, my counterpart, the attorney who had the other client, if we sat down with our clients, what would be the advantage?
I think there's probably three things that parties would be interested in considering if they were going to do a case with a private judge. The first is speed, and what I mean by that is that right now most common pleas judges have anywhere between 600 to 1,200 cases on their dockets that are active cases any given time throughout this region. Maybe not quite that much in Ashland and Wayne counties, maybe a little bit more in that in Cuyahoga and Summit counties. Clearly, a private judge is going to have relatively few cases on their docket, and so they're going to be able to get to your case faster.
I see.
Second,
Okay.
and also this goes along with, and the second reason is certainty, and here's what I mean by that. The Ohio rules of superintendents provide that if two cases are set for the same time, one's a civil case and one's a criminal case, the criminal case goes first, regardless of which case has been around longer.
Okay.
So, for example, you may have a civil case that's been pending for a couple years. You may have a new criminal case that only has been pending for 2 months.
I see.
But if they're set for trial on the same day,
The criminal's
the
gonna
criminal
bump.
case got to go first. That's right.
So-
And so you don't really know. A lot of times, and this really happens, especially happens up in Cuyahoga, and also to somewhat down in Summit County, is that you may get to court thinking you're going to be in front of Judge X, and you're told you're now going to be in front of Judge Y because Judge X is trying a criminal case, and they can spin you off to an assigned judge, who you may not have had any contact with.
Sure.
Which I guess brings me to the third reason why people might want to consider a private judge, and that is certainty of who's going to be the decision maker. So I think the speed, the certainty, and also I think certainty of who's going to be decision maker, certainty of when the case is going to go to trial.
But it has back to my hypothetical, my client and opposing counsel's client must be totally advised of what we're talking about.
Right, you're talking about 4 signatures on the agreement.
Okay. Both
Your
lawyers?
Yes,
Yeah.
both lawyers
Okay.
and
I'm
both
with you.
clients.
Okay.
That's
All
correct.
right, well, that's why this show is going to be very helpful because for many people who view this, including my lawyer audiences, I'm sure they're finding this rather interesting. Now, I think you touched on it, but I think it's a really important point to go back to for a minute. All right, once this agreement is struck between, hypothetically my client and opposing counsels. Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, once the agreement is filed, what does the judge whose docket is pending do?
They put an order on transferring the case to the private judge.
Oh, okay, just like any other
Just like-
judgment entry.
That's right. They put a journal entry on saying this case will now be transferred to, in my case, it'd be Judge Kimbler.
Right.
And there's even on the Supreme Court forms that the public judges you referred to, which is actually a good term, that the public judge fills out every month. There's a column on that Supreme Court report that asked them to show the names or numbers of the cases that have been assigned to private judges.
And you say this thing has been around 1984.
Right.
It's 30.
Yeah, I think as
better than
far as
30
I can
years.
tell, the concept may have come out of California. In California, it got known as the term that was used in California media was rent-a-judge. But the idea of using private judges or retired judges in a private capacity, in the sense that they're paid by private individuals and not by the public, has been around in Ohio since 1984. But interestingly enough, there's only about 19 retired judges in Ohio who have also indicated to the Supreme Court that they're willing to serve as private judges.
Very small number. And I guess my question was going to be to you, for all those years you sat here in Wadsworth as well as, in Medina, did you ever encounter one of
No.
these where you had a docket?
No.
It never happened.
No.
So it's pretty interesting. But you obviously found out about it, and so here we are.
Now it may
pretty
be I never
interesting stuff.
it may be I never encountered it because there may not be a market for it, but we'll find
I
out.
don't know. I mean, I think something becomes a market for when people know about it. But it's clearly, you've cited the code 270110, and it's there, obviously. The advantages, as you've mentioned, certainty, discretion. You wrote them down for me here. Convenience.
Yeah, discretion in that you don't have to have the hearing in the courthouse. And there's a lot of people who don't necessarily want their business to be in the courthouse.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's also, to a certain extent, more control, which is also a selling point, so to speak, because if you agree on a date, that date's going to go.
Sure.
And I think that would probably be from the standpoint of people who are litigants. One thing that really bothers litigants is that the process seems to take a long time.
Sure.
From their standpoint, and there's usually very good reasons why the process is taking a long time. For example, what I said earlier about criminal cases
bumping.
knocking
Sure,
out
I've had
civil
this
cases.
happen to me on numerous
Sure.
occasions.
So the question, but for the average litigant who is not a lawyer,
Yeah.
they don't understand how this works.
Absolutely not. And he's frustrated, and but when I call him, I tell him, we've been bumped, and I explain exactly what you just explained. People are disappointed. They're ready. Their witnesses are ready. So I mean, obviously I could see some real advantage to this. I think maybe a division, a schism, or whatever you want to call it here, of what you're doing with your life now, though. The private judge is indeed, keyword judge.
Right.
At the end of the day, Judge Kimbler said this is what's going to be.
Right.
And if you don't like it, you can go to the Court of Appeals or do whatever
Right.
you want to do. Where this other training you've been taking and what you've obviously gotten
Mediation.
quite interested in, that's not binding at all, is it?
No, the mediation, what you're trying to do in a mediation situation is you're trying to facilitate the parties to make their own settlement. And the reason why mediation is sometimes, not all the time, the reason why mediation is sometimes effective is that if parties are able to have input and believe that they had some control over a settlement, they're more likely to abide by the settlement.
So, in your court, for all the years I practiced in front of you, there was always a pretrial, which you were not present, where the prosecutor and myself attempted
That was the
to...
criminal side, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mediation is only in civil cases.
Right, but I mean, to make a point, when we came to you, and you reminded us right away, I'm not bound to any of
Right,
this.
right.
And ultimately, it was your decision. But, so I could see where this doesn't have any bearing at all on criminal, but in divorce work, and where you try to bring the parties together to discuss it. It would seem like that would be very helpful, wouldn't it?
It can be. It can be very helpful, especially if the people are having issues involving child custody,
Sure.
child support, child visitation. The reason why mediation is probably more effective in divorce work than it is in other work is that if the parties have children, they are never going to be in a position where they don't have some contact with each other.
Yeah.
In other words, most lawsuits, most civil lawsuits, the parties don't have to see each other after the lawsuit's over.
You get the money or
Even
whatever.
if-
and
that's
it.
right. Even if they've had a business relationship,
Yeah.
they don't have to do that.
Kids are never going to go away.
But that's right. You know, they're always going to find themselves interacting with each other, and so I think in those situations, mediation can be pretty effective.
Yeah. Well, I've been fortunate for all the years I've done Law Talk to have almost all of your colleagues on in Medina, as well as appellant judges, whatnot. And Mary Kovac has appeared on the show.
Right. She uses mediation.
Well, yeah, she mentioned on the show.
Right.
But I guess you really, all the years I've known you, had never had anything to do with domestic relations. But
No, I haven't actually done domestic relations.
would you be interested in mediating? Or
Oh yeah,
Because I think there'd be
when
plenty
I
of
was
people
in-
would
when
be
I
real
was in-
interested.
Well, maybe when I was in private practice, I did about 35 to 50 divorces every year for about 10 years. So I probably did between 300 to 500 divorces or dissolutions. So in terms of experience, I've had some experience in that area.
Well, I'm going to end this show like I end every show when you come. But we just scratched the surface. Would you come back?
Sure, John.
Okay.
Always for you, buddy.
Well, I mean, there's always, every time I see you, you have something pretty interesting to talk about. So again, thank you for being my guest on Law
Well,
Talk,
thank
Judge.
you for having me, John. Appreciate it.
At CZ Clip, we're devoted to the education of today's legal issues. Fueled by the public's keen interest in our legal system and current events, CZ Clip is dedicated to the educational venues aimed at enhancing the understanding by all citizens. For a complete listing of dates and times for this telecast, tune in to WCTV Channel 15 or log on to wadsworthcity.com and follow the links to WCTV.
I'm John Celebrezze. Please join me in getting a better understanding of the law.